An airport guard confronted a man for carrying a bottle, but he had no idea the man was a Navy medic, and the situation quickly turned in his favor. An airport guard slammed the baby's uncle for carrying a bottle, thinking no one would intervene. He didn't realize the man was a Navy medic, trained to react instantly and protect at all costs. The moment the shove landed, the cabin's power shifted. Subscribe. If you believe arrogance collapses the instant true authority rises. The slap of flesh against steel broke the calm. Ren Malick's back struck the cold edge of the inspection table with a thud. His breath knocked from him in an instant. The sharp cry of an infant followed, the kind that slices through noise and silences a crowd. In that frozen second, every eye in the security lane turned. Just moments earlier, the world had been normal. Velvet morning sunlight spilled through the high glass ceiling of Veldenport International Terminal. Rolling suitcases, murmured goodbyes, quiet wheels on tile. But all of that vanished the moment Officer Brancourt lunged. Ren blinked rapidly, adjusting to the sudden, violent change in rhythm. His muscles tensed, not in retaliation, but in instinct. Naval training told him not to escalate, not with civilians around, not with a baby crying behind him. A foot away, Jalen Merrick stood frozen, one hand on the stroller, the other raised in helpless protest. "He's got a doctor's note," Jalen said, voice cracking. "It's for the baby. He's dehydrated. It's prescribed." But Bran didn't even glance his way. The officer's hand was pressed hard against Ren's chest, fingers curled tight, not just restraining, but punishing. His breath was sharp and ragged, eyes focused not on Ren, not on Jalen, not on the child, but on a single item that now lay spinning near the table's edge, the small, clear bottle. It landed upright. The fluid inside, a faint blue, almost like glacier melt, shimmered under the overhead lights. Its label was clear, typed, official, a pediatric electrolyte solution. But Bran's glare burned through it like it held something radioactive. "You're testing security," Bran growled, his voice low, not shouted but sharp enough to slice through the hushed murmurs around them. Ren coughed, finding his voice through the growing pressure on his ribs. "Officer, I'm a Navy medic. This is standard hydration formula, approved for infants under medical care. There's paperwork in the—" "Don't move," Bran snapped, pressing harder. Around them, passengers had stopped. A mother tugged her child back a step. A businessman angled his phone, filming silently. Others hesitated, unsure if what they were witnessing was dangerous or justified. Ren didn't flinch. "Read the label," he said calmly, but with steel beneath the words. "That's all I'm asking." Bran didn't budge. "You think you can slip this past because you're in uniform? That baby's just your excuse." "Excuse?" Jalen echoed, stepping forward now, disbelief etched across his face. "Are you serious? That's my nephew. He had a dehydration scare this week. We got clearance." Bran raised a hand toward him without looking. "Back off." Jalen's eyes darted to Ren, then to the bottle, then to the crowd. He whispered to the baby, who whimpered again. Small fingers curled around the edge of a blue blanket. His mind was racing. Stay calm. Stay rational. But Bran's posture wasn't that of a man enforcing rules. It was a man reacting to something else. Something internal. Something already decided. Ren slowly lifted one hand, palm outward, and reached again toward the bottle. Not to hide it, just to show it clearly. "Here," he said, steady and clear. "Look, read. You're making a mistake." That's when Bran grabbed him again, twisting his collar and slamming him harder into the table. Metal screeched beneath them. A gasp rippled through the line. "Restricted substance attempt," Bran barked toward no one in particular. "Violation of checkpoint code 12-." He didn't finish. Behind a pillar just 10 feet away, partially hidden by a stack of luggage bins, a young man raised his phone. Corvin Hollis, a junior baggage attendant barely out of training, kept one eye on the unfolding chaos and one on the record button. His hands were trembling, but his instincts were sharper than his fear. This didn't feel like policy. It felt like something else. Wren's shoulders pressed against the edge, but he didn't resist. He looked past Bran, toward the crowd, toward the crying child, and toward Jalen, who stood frozen in protective silence. He wasn't afraid, not exactly, but he was calculating now, assessing more than just pain, assessing motive. This wasn't about airport safety, not anymore. This was the moment everything began to unravel. Wren's ribs ached as Bran's forearm dug mercilessly across his back, pressing him down onto the cold steel edge of the inspection table. The room spun slightly, not from impact but from the sheer disbelief of what was happening. This wasn't a normal confrontation. This wasn't how airport security was supposed to work. "I'm not resisting," Wren managed, his voice strained but steady. "That bottle is for my nephew. Check the label, please." Bran didn't answer. His jaw was locked tight, eyes narrow with a sharpness that didn't feel procedural. It felt personal. Or worse, like he was following a command that hadn't been spoken aloud. Behind them, baby Liron cried harder, the sharp wails echoing off the polished tile floor and bouncing through the wide, sterile security terminal. Jalen stood frozen for a moment, one hand on the stroller, the other raised halfway like a man caught between the urge to protect and the fear of triggering something worse. "Hey, back up!" Bran barked over his shoulder at Jalen, not bothering to turn. "This is a restricted security intervention." Jalen didn't move. "That's my baby nephew," he said, his voice shaking. "And that's his uncle. You've got no reason." "I said back up." A ripple of discomfort passed through the security line. Several passengers began filming, their phones slowly rising as they realized this wasn't routine. But others hesitated, unsure whether they were witnessing an arrest or something more ambiguous. Was this man resisting? Was the guard within his rights? Wren raised his hands slightly, palms open, even as he remained pinned. "You're making a mistake," he said, breathing through the pressure. "I'm a Navy medic. I can verify my credentials. Let me explain." Bran's grip tightened. His knuckles turned pale. But for a split second, just one, he paused. Something about the words seemed to pierce the adrenaline, or the programming. That pause didn't last. Without warning, Bran slammed Wren harder into the table, drawing a sharp collective gasp from the onlookers. The sound was sickening. Metal against bone. Force without mercy. Wren gritted his teeth but didn't cry out. He had trained under worse conditions. But this was supposed to be a civilian space, not a battlefield. A few feet away, Officer Derek Vale arrived at a half-jog, confusion flashing across his face. He was tall, slightly older, his uniform neater than Bran's. He slowed the moment he saw who was involved. "Bran," Derek called cautiously, stepping forward with his hands open. "What's going on?" Bran didn't look up. Restricted substance. Suspect attempted to bypass gate. Derek frowned, scanning the scene. His eyes landed on the small transparent bottle now resting sideways near the X-ray scanner, where it had fallen. He glanced at the baby's stroller, then at Wren's position. "That's for the baby, isn't it?" Derek asked, his tone less accusatory and more bewildered. "He said he's a medic. Maybe we should just—" "Protocol override," Bran snapped, interrupting him. "Immediate restraint is authorized." The phrase froze Derek in place. It wasn't standard, not even close. In fact, he'd never heard it used in his years on staff. "Protocol what?" Derek repeated quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Wren lifted his face, just enough to lock eyes with Derek. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "That's not an override from your terminal procedures. That's a different language. Military. And this is not what it looks like." Bran stiffened at that. The hand pinning Wren began to tremble, but instead of backing off, he doubled down. His voice dropped low and fast, as if talking to himself as much as to the others. "He fits the profile," Bran muttered. "He matches it. It's him. They said we'd know." Jalen, trying to shield Laurent from the surrounding panic, wheeled the stroller backward toward the far wall, placing himself between the child and the chaos. His eyes flicked to the bottle, then to Derek, pleading for someone, anyone, to intervene. "Sir, with respect," Derek said slowly, stepping closer, "we should isolate the item. Run a full scan. There's a process. You know that." Bran shot him a glance that was more warning than acknowledgement. This is the process now. Derek hesitated. He'd seen Bran agitated before, stern, even angry, but this wasn't temper. This was obsession, or paranoia, or something that didn't belong in this terminal, and still the bottle sat in plain view, untouched, unread. Bran hadn't once looked at the label, almost like he didn't want to. From behind a pillar, Corvin Hollis, baggage attendant, barely older than 20, peeked out again, phone now filming steadily. His hands were shaking, but his instincts told him this footage might one day matter. And if no one believed what they saw here, he'd make sure they remembered it. Wren, gathering strength, slowly turned his head toward Derek. "He's not reacting to the bottle. He's reacting to something else, something he thinks I am." Before Derek could respond, Bran suddenly lifted Wren by the collar with surprising force, dragging him upright a few inches. "I said, stay down," he barked. More passengers shouted now. Someone yelled, "That's enough!" Another shouted that they were calling airport command. The mood was shifting fast, from confusion to outrage. Derek rushed forward and physically placed himself between them, shoving Bran back just enough to loosen his grip. "We need a supervisor now," he said firmly to anyone within earshot. "I'll handle this," Bran growled, reaching for his radio. Wren caught his breath, then heard it, clearly, for the first time. The phrase Bran had used, unauthorized medic access. His stomach dropped. That wasn't airport language, that was military clearance code, specific, obscure, and dangerous. Jalen, standing guard over Laurent, locked eyes with Wren, his mouth a thin line of fear. "Wren," he said quietly, "we need to get out of here." But before Wren could answer, Bran raised his radio and clicked the transmit button. "Requesting reinforcement. Suspect matches dormant profile. Repeat, dormant profile triggered." The words were like a switch. The surrounding officers froze. Even Derek looked stunned. The silence didn't last long. Overhead, a shrill alarm blared to life, a sound no one in the terminal had ever heard before. It wasn't the standard gate alert. It wasn't even a fire signal. It was something different, rhythmic, piercing, and unknown. Passengers screamed. Staff turned to look. Phones rose higher. And at the center of it all, Bran stood motionless, radio still in hand, eyes flicking from Wren to the bottle, and back again. That sound was the first sign something bigger was happening behind the scenes. The alarm shrieked through the terminal like a blade, sharp and sudden, freezing every movement mid-action. Red emergency lights pulsed above the checkpoint, casting intermittent crimson flashes across the polished floor and bewildered faces. Officer Bran jerked his head upward toward the ceiling, his grip loosening just enough for Dr. Wren Malik to stagger back a step, catching himself against the cold edge of the inspection table. His ribs ached, but his composure held, barely. Derek Vale, the second officer, barked orders with urgency. "Clear the lane. Everyone back." His voice cracked through the growing confusion, trying to inject control into a moment rapidly slipping into chaos. But Bran wasn't listening. He stepped forward again, arm raised, jaw clenched. "He's connected to the alarm," Bran announced, pointing at Wren like a man accusing a saboteur. The passengers flinched at the accusation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A few phones tilted higher, their camera lenses locking onto the escalating confrontation. Wren's brow furrowed as he steadied himself. "That alarm has nothing to do with me," he said calmly, one hand extended in a non-threatening gesture. "This bottle," he held it up again, shaking slightly from the earlier impact, is a medical electrolyte mix. Prescribed, documented. For my nephew." Beside him, Jalen Merrick held out the folded doctor's note, his voice cracking as he pleaded, "Please, just read this. This is for the baby. That's all." But Bran didn't even glance at the paper. He hadn't looked once, not at the bottle, not at the label, not at the note. Almost as if he was deliberately avoiding it. Corvin Hollis, still crouched behind a pillar 10 feet away, continued recording with trembling hands. The image in his phone's frame shifted constantly, trying to capture not just the aggression, but the expressions, the fear, the hesitation, the silent protest in Officer Derek's eyes. Wren straightened, his military discipline kicking in like muscle memory. He scanned Bran's stance, the way his fingers twitched near his belt, the tension in his neck, the hyperfocus that seemed divorced from the reality in front of him. This wasn't protocol enforcement. This was obsession. Something else was driving Bran. Before Wren could speak further, Bran lurched forward and seized him by the collar, lifting him partially off the ground with a force that seemed disproportionate to his frame. Gasps erupted from the passengers. A man shouted, "I'm calling airport command." Jalen instinctively pushed the stroller back toward the nearest wall, eyes wide, mouth tight. His free hand hovered protectively over the baby's chest. The infant had stopped crying, stunned by the noise and the violence, but Jalen knew that stillness could flip at any moment. "Enough!" Derek's voice sliced through the air as he stepped in, shoving Bran backward with both arms. "You're way out of line." For a moment, Bran resisted, eyes burning with something that looked more like fear than anger. Then, as if yanked from a trance, he stumbled back a step. "We need supervision," Derek said low, quiet enough that only Bran and Wren could hear. "This isn't standard anymore. We need someone from command." Bran's head twitched, his expression glassy. He muttered something under his breath. "What did you say?" Derek asked. Bran turned his gaze toward him, eyes unblinking. "Unauthorized medic access." Wren's heart skipped. That wasn't TSA language. That wasn't airport security lingo. That was military. It was the kind of phrase you'd hear during high-level field extractions, during containment drills, during the kind of work Wren had done years ago and never spoke about. He opened his mouth. "Where did you hear that term?" But Bran didn't answer. Instead, Bran reached for his radio. Wren immediately stepped in, one hand raised. "Officer Bran," he said firmly, his tone the exact register he'd used in battlefield triage, "you are making a grave mistake. You need to stop now." The moment stretched thin. Bran's thumb hovered over the transmit button. The red light of the alarm pulsed across his face like a warning. And then he froze. His hand dropped. His jaw twitched. His breathing slowed just enough for everyone to feel it. That moment of hesitation, silent, electric, cut through the noise and fractured something in the room. Passengers stared. Derek stared. Even Corvin, behind the lens, paused breathing for half a second, because in that hesitation, they saw it. Not doubt, not confusion, recognition. Wren didn't move. He held the moment like a bomb with no timer, unsure whether to throw it or defuse it. And deep in Bran's eyes, something shifted, just barely. As if he had seen this exact moment before, as if it was always supposed to happen this way. That hesitation would soon expose a truth no one expected. Bran Cor's body remained tense, his hands clenched at his sides, the space between him and Wren thick with heat and static. The bottle, small, clear, innocent, was still in Wren's grasp. Derek Vale seized the narrow window of stillness to pull Wren aside by the arm, voice low but urgent. "You all right?" Derek asked, eyes flicking to the bruises beginning to form along Wren's ribs and collarbone. Wren exhaled through his nose, standing upright despite the pain. "I'm fine. But listen, what does protocol override mean? And that other one, unauthorized medic access? Those aren't airport codes." Derek hesitated. His mouth opened, but words failed him for a moment. "They're not," he admitted at last. "I've never heard them used in any legitimate terminal procedure. But Bran, he's been acting strange lately, like he's waiting for someone to walk through that gate and give him a reason." As the two men spoke, Jalen sat crouched by the stroller, quietly humming to Laron in a trembling voice. The infant was still sniffling, cheeks flushed, unaware of the full tension in the room, but reacting to the emotions swirling around him. Jalen's eyes stayed on Bran, watchful, protective, afraid. Corvin Hollis, hiding behind a nearby pillar, hadn't stopped recording. His phone trembled slightly, not from fear, but adrenaline. He whispered softly to himself as he documented the scene. Timestamps, officer names, strange phrases. His instincts told him this was no longer about one bottle. It never had been. 2 more officers arrived, Torrin Hale, calm but clearly uneasy, and Red Marin, his face blank but his gait hesitant. Bran barely acknowledged them before barking. "Detain him! Now!" Torrin raised his hand in a slow, measured motion. "Bran, you need to stop. Let's get the terminal director. You're escalating a medical exception like it's a high-risk breach." "This is a breach," Bran hissed. "He's a flagged traveler under secondary alert tier." "Flagged by who?" Derek demanded. "There is no tier like that on our roster." But Bran wasn't listening. With sudden speed, he stepped forward and ripped the bottle from Ren's hand. "This is being seized for containment analysis," he announced to the room like a soldier reporting to a commander. Ren instinctively reached to retrieve it, his voice calm but firm. "That's prescribed fluid. It's for a child. You're not authorized to confiscate it." Bran shoved him back. Hard. A collective gasp rose from the nearby passengers. Corvin's phone caught every second. Jalen stood in an instant, moving between Bran and the stroller, his stance awkward but unmistakably protective. "You need to calm down," he said, trying to keep his voice steady even as his legs shook. "Get them to a safe room," Derek told Torrin in a low tone. "This is past protocol now. We'll sort it, but the child needs to be secured." Torrin nodded and stepped toward Jalen, motioning for him to follow. "Let's move somewhere quieter, just for now." Jalen, torn between hesitation and instinct, nodded and began to guide the stroller toward the hallway exit. That's when Bran lunged. "No!" he shouted, charging toward the stroller with alarming speed. "The bottle cannot leave the sector." His eyes were wild, not with rage but with something more primal. Fear. Obsession. Ren moved on instinct. He stepped into Bran's path and planted both feet, arms extended. When Bran made contact, Ren didn't flinch. He absorbed the hit, gripping Bran by the forearms and locking him in place. The impact reverberated through the air like a thunderclap. Passengers screamed. Officers reached for radios. The tension broke open like a splitting fault line. "Let it go," Ren barked, eyes locked on Bran's, his hands clenched around the man's wrists like a vice. "You're going to hurt someone." Bran's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting between Ren and the baby. He didn't speak, didn't blink. It was as if his mind was trapped between 2 commands, one official and one he was never supposed to act on in public. Torrin grabbed Bran from behind, pulling him away with measured force. Red helped pin Bran's arms, keeping him restrained without forcefully striking him. Derek stepped forward, shielding Jalen and the stroller now tucked into the corner near the emergency hallway. Bran didn't fight the restraint, but he didn't stop staring either. His eyes, unfocused and distant, kept returning to the bottle still clutched in Ren's hand. It was no longer about fluids or rules or airport guidelines. It was about something else. And in the suffocating silence that followed, as the officers restrained their own, as passengers whispered and scattered like wind-blown leaves, as the bottle sat unassuming in Ren's grip, the truth began to feel less like a question and more like a trap. None of them knew that the bottle itself was the least mysterious part of the day. Torrin Hale moved fast, one arm outstretched, placing his body squarely between Bran Khor and the baby's stroller. Bran's hand froze mid-reach, fingers twitching like he was deciding whether to shove the officer aside. Behind them, the terminal's blaring alarm continued to pulse in an eerie, rhythmic pattern. 3 short bursts followed by 1 long. No one recognized the sequence. Not the guards, not the passengers, not even the security staff staring up at the blinking red lights embedded in the ceiling. Ren Malik didn't move at first. His breathing was steady, but his body ached from the blows. The rhythmic alarm throbbed in his chest like a second heartbeat. He stood with his feet planted, reading Bran's posture the way he'd been trained to read unstable patients in field trauma zones. And something about Bran's stance sent warning signals through every cell in his body. Bran was still, too still, except for his hands, both trembling with rapid, involuntary ticks. Not the kind that came from rage, not adrenaline. No, these were micro-tremors, panic-induced, and they didn't match the behavior of the man who just tried to rip the bottle from his hands like it held a detonator. "Sir, step back," Torrance said, keeping his voice low but firm, eyes never leaving Bran. "We have this contained." Bran didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the stroller, on the bottle within it, or perhaps on what he thought it symbolized. Jalen Merrick stood frozen behind it, one hand gripping the stroller's handle, the other lightly resting on the baby's chest. Laron had stopped crying, but his little hands still trembled. Jalen's lips moved silently, counting, maybe praying, maybe both. Ren took a breath, ready to speak, but Red Marin stepped forward first, his voice calm but direct. "We should take Bran offline. Now. This isn't just a policy dispute anymore." Bran's head snapped toward Red, face twisted with something between disbelief and disgust. "Don't touch me," he warned, voice strained and hoarse. His gaze darted again to the bottle, and that's when Ren saw it. The flicker of recognition, or fear, or both. Not of what was inside the bottle, but of what he thought it might mean. Bran wasn't reacting to liquid, he was reacting to memory. Ren stepped closer. "The bottle is standard," he said evenly. "A pediatric electrolyte blend. The baby's recovering from a dehydration episode. Everything here is documented." But Bran didn't blink. He didn't ask for documents. Instead, his voice rose above the alarm. "I know what medics transport." Gasps rippled across the terminal. Passengers peeked from behind terminal benches, watching from behind their phones, some now live streaming. The words weren't standard. They were coded, military coded. Ren's jaw tensed. Those 5 words weren't part of any airport manual. They were echoes from a different world, one with black site extractions, classified triage zones, and codes whispered in medical tents under floodlights. Derek Vale moved quietly to Ren's side, eyes shadowed with concern. "He's not supposed to know that," he muttered. "That language, I haven't heard it in years." Ren turned to him, heart beginning to race, not from fear, but recognition. "What was Bran before this?" Derek's answer was slow, careful. "Rumor was, he worked under a retired directive, something tied to covert screenings, long defunct, supposedly." The ground beneath the moment shifted. Bran broke the stillness again, lunging toward the stroller, but this time Torrin didn't hesitate. He moved behind him with tactical precision and locked Bran in a restraint hold, securing his arms even as the man thrashed. Bran's voice cracked and roared. "He's part of a classified transfer event. He shouldn't be here. You have no idea what he's carrying." Ren flinched, not from the volume, but from the specific phrase, classified transfer event. That wasn't a term anyone outside specific Navy channels should have used. He hadn't heard it since his assignment 6 years ago, an assignment buried with layers of red tape and shut down with a sweep of digital erasure. "How does he know that term?" Ren asked under his breath. Derek didn't answer immediately. He looked at Bran like a man seeing the past rise from the ground. "I think he was reactivated," he whispered. "Not officially. Quietly." Bran continued to thrash, but the strength had gone out of his arms. His legs buckled slightly, and he sagged against Torrin's grip, breathing hard. Then, without warning, he went completely still, his expression flattening into a thin, tight smile that made the air in the room grow colder. The chaos didn't stop. The alarm still wailed. The passengers still watched. But in that moment, everything felt silent. Even Laron stopped fidgeting. Wren stared at Bran, trying to piece together the shards. The bottle, the alarm, the military language, the sudden use of terms that were never meant to exist outside covert circles. And that smile. That terrible, knowing smile. It wasn't madness, it was certainty. Bran knew something no one else in the terminal had uncovered yet. The smile told Wren that Bran knew something none of them had uncovered yet. Bran had barely been pulled away when the officers moved swiftly, guiding Wren, Jalen, and the baby down a sterile corridor into a private inspection room sealed by reinforced glass. The slam of the door behind them echoed like a vault closing. Officer Torrin locked it immediately, his fingers trembling slightly as he keyed in the override code. He turned around, breath catching in his throat. "I'm sorry," Torrin said, not as an officer, but as a man caught in something he no longer understood. "I had no idea it would get like this. The supervisor's on his way." Wren didn't respond right away. He was sitting now, slowly lowering himself into the metal-framed chair at the center of the room, every bruise on his ribs throbbing like a second heartbeat. The bottle, still intact, the label crumpled but legible, rested in his palm like evidence from a crime scene. He turned it over once, twice. Jalen stood by the corner, rocking the stroller gently, whispering to calm Laron's whimpers, his voice low and trembling but steady enough to soothe. Moments later, the door unlocked again. Derek entered, holding a folder marked with a red tag. It looked official, but not like anything from standard airport operations. He walked directly to Wren and handed it over. "I pulled this from the internal system," Derek said, voice low. "These aren't files any of us should have been able to access. I think Bran did something before this even began." Wren opened the folder cautiously. Expecting procedural checklists or policy notes, he instead found something chilling. A series of profiles, dozens of them, flagged under a header that read, "Medical Transport Specialists, Category M, Dormant Designation." His breath hitched. These were personnel files, Navy files, outdated codes he hadn't seen since his deployment rotation in the Baltor Strain Relief Operation 6 years ago. "I was removed from that program," Wren said, flipping through the pages. "It was dissolved. Shut down." "But your name is still tagged in this system," Derek said. "Someone put you back in, or never took you out." Jalen stepped closer, eyes scanning the edges of the papers. "You were never supposed to be on any civilian watch list, right?" "No," Wren said quietly. "This isn't a civilian list." Derek hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "There's something else. Bran's been submitting frequent data pulls, specifically tied to Category M travelers." Wren looked up sharply. "What does that even mean?" "No one on staff knows," Derek said. "We've asked. The system accepts it but doesn't define it. It's like a ghost category." Before any of them could say more, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied, then silence. The alarm, screaming and disorienting for the past 10 minutes, stopped abruptly. No fade-out, just silence. And in that silence came something worse than noise. Torrin reappeared at the door, his expression drained. "Director's on his way." But his eyes flicked to something behind him. Not just the director. 2 men stepped into view behind him, both wearing dark charcoal suits, no visible badges, and matching expressions of unreadable calm. They didn't glance at Torrin or Derek. Their eyes were already locked on Wren. The taller of the two, broad-shouldered and pale-eyed, spoke first. "Dr. Malik." Wren rose slightly, positioning his body between them and Jalen, who instinctively pushed the stroller an inch back. "Yes," Wren said, voice flat. The second man, leaner and darker-haired, stepped beside the first. "We'll need a moment of your time." Derek frowned. "Who are you?" The lean man smiled faintly. "Field assessors, Hale and Verdun." "We didn't request any field agents," Torn said, stepping closer. "You didn't have to," the first man replied smoothly. "This is a special assessment." Wren took a step forward, his fingers closing tighter around the bottle in his hand. "Who gave you my name?" The taller man didn't blink. "We're here under cross-protocol authority." "That's not an answer," Wren replied. The baby let out a soft cough. Jalen hushed him quickly, but the noise shifted both agents' attention. Subtle, sharp, predatory. Wren's stance stiffened. "Back off," he said. "Whatever this is, it doesn't involve the child." "Actually," Verdun said softly, "this involves you." "I know," Wren replied, his voice hardening. "That's why I'm standing here and not running." Neither Hale nor Verdun moved. Behind them, the hallway remained empty, the silence now deep enough to hear the low hum of security cameras. Yet none of the officers made a move to stop the strangers. Derek, who had been silent for the past few seconds, finally spoke. "No one gave them your name, Wren. And yet, they walked in asking for it." Wren glanced down at the bottle one last time. His grip never wavered. Their arrival proved Bran was not confused. He was early. The moment the door slid open, the two suits stepped inside with quiet, unsettling confidence, their presence shifting the air before they even spoke. They introduced themselves only as Field Assessors Hale and Verdun, their calm, measured tones contrasting sharply with the tense atmosphere they had walked into. Derek and Torrin exchanged uneasy glances, the kind that spoke of rules being bent so far they were close to breaking. The terminal had protocols, procedures, and paperwork for every situation, but they had never used outside field assessors, and certainly not ones who appeared without identification or prior notice. Hale's gaze swept the room once, steady and clinical, before settling on the bottle in Wren's hand. "We need the liquid for cross-protocol safety verification," he said, his voice polite but layered with authority. His posture remained still, controlled, as though he had rehearsed this exact sentence many times. Wren felt an immediate tightening in his chest. Nothing about Hale's request aligned with standard airport operations. Wren shook his head. "The bottle is medically documented," he replied, holding it closer to his chest. "I can't surrender it without understanding who you are and what authority you have." His tone was even, but steady like a man bracing for impact. Verdun stepped forward with a slow, calculated movement, lowering his voice as he approached. His eyes, sharp and observant, did not look at the bottle. They locked directly onto Wren. "Our concern is not the liquid," Verdun murmured, his expression unreadable. "Our concern is you." Jalen stiffened behind the stroller, gripping the handle tighter. His instincts screamed danger, even if he could not yet name why. The baby shifted softly, unaware of the growing pressure in the room. Wren narrowed his eyes. "Then explain something to me," he said. "How do you know about my former Navy assignment?" For a brief moment, the room felt suspended, waiting for the truth. But Verdun didn't answer. Instead, he asked another question, one that struck Wren like a sudden drop in altitude. "Have you had any unreported contact with classified biological equipment?" Wren's pulse spiked. He had worked only with standard field medical kits, nothing hidden, nothing off the record. "No," he said firmly. "I was a medic, not part of any classified program." But Hale was already shaking his head, as if Wren's response was expected. "Your identity was flagged because you match a dormant transfer profile," he revealed, folding his hands behind his back. "A profile last activated years ago for a medic assigned to emergency extraction missions." The words hit Wren harder than Bran's earlier shove. He felt the floor beneath him steady, then shift again as he tried to make sense of what Hale was implying. "That profile is outdated," Wren insisted, his voice tightening. "Invalid. It shouldn't exist anymore." "It exists," Verdun replied calmly, "and it must be audited." Derek stepped between them, his jaw clenching. The fear in his eyes had hardened into defiance. "This terminal does not allow external interrogation without documented clearance," he said, planting himself like a wall in front of Wren. "Show authorization, or you do not proceed." Hale's expression didn't change, but his voice did. Cold, absolute. "This is not terminal protocol." A quiet thump sounded from the stroller as the baby shifted again, followed by a soft cough, just a small, natural sound. Yet it drew both assessors' eyes immediately, their heads turning in perfect sync. Something about their attention snapped a warning inside Wren's mind. He moved instantly, stepping between them and the stroller, his stance protective, controlled, and unshakable. "That's close enough," he said, his voice lower, firmer than before. For the first time, Hale and Verdun hesitated, not out of fear, but calculation. Their expressions didn't change, yet their silence conveyed something far more revealing than words. Wren felt it. Jalen felt it. Even Derek and Torin sensed the shift. They had never truly been after the bottle. And as Wren saw the faint gleam in Verdun's eyes, a truth landed with chilling clarity, fitting perfectly into place with Bran's strange language, the unexplained alarm, and the revived military phrasing. In that moment, Wren realized the bottle was bait. He was the real target. The guard smirked, confident his strength would go unchallenged, unaware that every move, every witness, and every second had already been anticipated by a man who has seen and survived far worse. If you believe cruelty under a uniform always folds when strategy meets unstoppable skill, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The tension snapped the moment Verdun pivoted toward the stroller. Wren didn't speak. He moved. His arm shot out in a sharp, instinctive line, blocking Verdun's path before the man could take another step. The air in the room thinned as if everyone had stopped breathing. "Don't," Wren said, his voice low, steady, unblinking. Verdun halted mid-step, gaze flicking down at the arm in his path, then back up to Wren's face. There was no anger there, only calm, but the kind of calm that held back something far heavier. Torin's voice cut through the standstill. "Paperwork," he said, stepping forward, his tone clipped but controlled. "I want identification, authorization, and jurisdiction now." Without pause, Hale reached into his coat and retrieved a sleek metallic device no larger than a glasses case. With a tap, it projected a holographic order in midair. Text floated crisply above the device, an official-looking seal, a signature, and beneath it the words, "Director Ralver Tane, Integrated Oversight Division." Derek stepped closer, eyes narrowing at the projection. "We don't have an Integrated Oversight Division," he said quietly. "Not in any of our databases." Hale's expression didn't shift. "Your system isn't updated." Those words landed heavily, a quiet insult veiled in bureaucracy. The flickering blue light of the hologram reflected off Wren's eyes as he glanced at the name, committing it to memory. Every instinct told him something was off. The projection was too polished, the signature too unfamiliar, the division too vague. Verdun straightened. "Dr. Malik and the contents in question are to be escorted to a secondary screening unit for further review." "No," Torin said flatly. "We're not transferring anyone without verified chain of command." Verdun tilted his head. "That's not a request." He turned to Wren. "You can come willingly, or be taken under override protocol." The words sent a cold ripple through the room. Override protocol. That same phrase Bran had shouted earlier. It wasn't just language, it was procedure. Old. Covert. and it wasn't meant to be used in places like this. Jalen rose from the bench, one hand tightly gripping the stroller's handle. "He's not going anywhere without me, or the baby," he added, voice trembling but firm. Hale's head turned toward him. "The child remains with the designated guardian," he said evenly, "but Dr. Malik must be separated." Wren stepped forward, putting himself between the stroller and the men again. "His formula requires specific timing. His needs are medical. I'm the one cleared to administer it." "That's not relevant to this directive," Verdun replied, his tone clipped. "It's relevant to me," Wren shot back. "He's my responsibility." Derek exhaled sharply and stepped between them. "This isn't an interrogation room," he said to Hale. "You're not internal command. I don't know who you report to, but until I see something with government stamps and federal backing, you're not laying a hand on him." The standoff held. Hale said nothing, but his eyes narrowed, calculating. Verdun's fingers twitched slightly near his side, not a weapon, but a subtle sign of readiness. Jalen gripped the stroller's handle tighter. The baby gave a soft, high-pitched whimper, as if sensing the heat in the air. Then the door opened. Kellen Varick stepped in, the terminal director's badge still clipped to his blazer, but his face had no authority left in it. He looked pale. Not surprised, not concerned, just resigned. His gaze flicked briefly across the room. Torin, Derek, Wren, the suits, and then dropped. "I need to speak with you both. Now. Privately," he said to Hale and Verdun. Hale gave a nod. Understood. As the two men followed Varick out of the room, they didn't glance back. The door shut softly, but the weight of it echoed. Wren's breath was steady, but his mind was racing. He turned to Torin, his voice low. "He's not surprised they're here." "No," Torin agreed. "He isn't." There was a silence that pressed hard against the glass walls. Then Torin leaned in closer. "I saw them once before," he whispered, eyes flicking to the closed door. "About 3 months ago. After that weird midnight lockdown in Gate 9. Bran was involved." Wren's brow furrowed. "The lockdown that never made the reports?" Torin nodded slowly. "No one ever found out what happened." Wren stared at the door, the sterile hallway beyond it now tinged with dread. Every move, every phrase, every delay, it was all pointing toward something larger, something rehearsed. And now Wren feared that whatever happened months ago was about to happen again. The door to the private room clicked shut, leaving behind a silence more deafening than the alarm that had echoed through the terminal moments earlier. Dr. Ren Malik stood at the center of the room, his breath steady but his muscles taut, pacing a short line between the inspection bench and the observation window. Every step marked his attempt to stay calm, to stay analytical, but the delay, the quiet, the absence of answers, it was all beginning to bend even his discipline. Jalen sat rigidly in the corner, rocking the baby stroller with one hand, whispering soft syllables that barely reached Laron's ears. The infant whimpered in his sleep, unaware that the adults around him stood on the brink of something no one yet understood. Jalen's eyes kept darting between Wren and the door, as if expecting it to burst open with another wave of men in black. Across the room, Officers Derek Vale and Torin Hale spoke in hushed tones, the frustration on their faces no longer subtle. Torin's hand tapped rhythmically on his belt, while Derek had long since dropped any pretense of neutrality. When the door finally creaked open, all eyes turned. Director Kellen Varick entered alone, his face carved into grim lines. The room stiffened. He avoided direct eye contact, instead walking slowly to the center, pausing as if carefully weighing his next sentence. "You'll be cleared to board your flight," he began, his voice low and controlled, "but the assessors will retain the bottle for investigative analysis." Wren stopped pacing. His jaw tightened, and for a brief second, his face revealed the quiet storm building beneath his calm. "That bottle," he said, each word sharp but steady, "was prescribed for my nephew's medical condition. He needs it mid-flight. I will not permit it to be taken unless you can cite the law that allows it." Jalen held the stroller tighter. Derek straightened up. Torrin's hand left his belt and curled into a fist. Varric hesitated. His gaze flicked toward the officers. He could see it. The subtle resistance, the unspoken unity forming between them. He sighed and nodded once to Derek, signaling the unspoken compromise. Let them go, for now. Derek moved toward the door and gently opened it, but the next moment shattered the brief illusion of peace. They had barely stepped into the hallway when Hale and Verdun reappeared, flanking the corridor like shadows made flesh. Their suits were untouched by tension, but their faces carried the cold steel of an operation regaining control. "Dr. Malik," Verdun announced, "a vehicle is waiting outside. You'll be escorted to an off-site review facility for further clarification." Wren's head turned slowly, his body shielding the stroller before his voice emerged, controlled but ironed with suspicion. "I'm not going anywhere. You have no documented authority, no civilian chain of command. I have seen no clearance, no legal basis." Before either assessor could reply, another figure appeared behind them, quiet, composed, chilling. Officer Bran, back in uniform, unshackled, unsuspended. Wren's breath caught. Jalen let out a quiet gasp, taking a half-step back. Bran stood with hands behind his back, posture neutral, but there was something deeper in his eyes. No longer rage, but obedience. Cold, precise obedience. No bruises. No reprimand badge. No disciplinary marking. Just reinstated like nothing had happened. Wren turned his head to Varric. The director was staring off to the side, his eyes locked on a generic safety placard on the wall, pretending not to see what stood before them all. The silence cracked. Derek, face drained of color, walked forward. Without a word, he reached for his badge and set it gently on the metal inspection table. His voice was barely above a whisper, but every syllable rang with resolve. "This is no longer an airport. It's a trap." Torrin followed. "I won't be part of this," he said, looking directly at Varric, then to Hale and Verdun. "Targeting a Navy medic over a baby's bottle. You think we'll stay silent for that?" Wren took a deep breath, stepped beside the stroller, and gently placed both hands on the handle. He gave Laron a final glance, still sleeping, still safe, and then pushed forward toward the exit, toward Bran. The hallway stood still as time. Bran didn't move. Verdun didn't move. Even Varric, in all his authority, stayed rooted where he stood, and so Wren walked, head high, shoulders straight, one step, then another. He met Bran's eyes as he passed. He didn't blink, and no one stopped him, not because they agreed, but because they didn't know how to. The moment the terminal doors slid open, applause rippled across the concourse. It wasn't loud, not at first, but it spread. A hesitant clap from a teenager by the window, a firm one from a businessman near the magazine stand, then a wave of uncoordinated approval from the crowd that had watched the chaos unfold from behind airport benches and glass dividers. Some passengers had already seen the footage, barely 10 minutes old, yet circulating with captions like "Medic thrown for baby bottle" and "Airport gone rogue." Wren didn't acknowledge the applause. His stride remained steady, protective, controlled. His right hand stayed firmly gripped on the stroller's handle, while his left cradled the small medical bottle against his chest. Jalen kept close, his body between the baby and any potential threat. The infant, Laron, had finally stopped crying. Whether it was exhaustion or the steady rhythm of movement, the child had drifted into a fragile doze, each breath quiet but steady. At the side exit near the loading docks, a figure detached from the shadows. Corvin Hollis. The young baggage attendant looked pale, sweat glinting on his forehead despite the morning chill. He didn't speak at first, just approached with one hand clenched tight around a small silver flash drive. "You'll need this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Wren took it, his eyes searching the man's face. No words of thanks, just a nod. Corvin understood. "It's already out there," Corvin added. "I sent it to 3 independent outlets. No names, no trace, just the footage, and one line. This is not airport misconduct. This is covert profiling." He didn't wait for a response. The moment the flash drive changed hands, Corvin turned and disappeared back into the maze of the service corridor like a ghost who had delivered his message and knew better than to linger near its consequences. Wren, Jalen, and the baby moved briskly into the pickup lane where a pre-booked rideshare waited. The driver, mid-30s, unbothered, earbuds in, barely glanced at them before unlocking the doors. As they climbed into the back seat, Wren glanced up at the terminal's second-floor windows. No signs of Hale. No Bran. No Verdun. But he knew better than to assume they weren't watching. Inside the vehicle, the door shut with a muffled thud. The city rolled by in silence, broken only by the baby's soft exhale. Wren inserted the flash drive into his tablet. The video loaded without issue. The first few seconds were shaky, Corvin's hand trembling behind the pillar, but what followed was clear, undeniable. Bran's grab, the first slam, the screaming baby, the alarm, the arrival of the unbadged suits, and then the whisper, caught so precisely that it chilled Wren's spine. Containment protocol. Jalen leaned closer, watching the footage in silence. When the moment played again, he spoke, barely audible. "They weren't after the bottle," he said. "They were after a signal." Wren didn't answer. His mind was moving too fast. He replayed the scene, not the footage, but the memory. Laron's cough. It hadn't been serious, just a dry tickle from the recycled terminal air. But the prescribed electrolyte formula had been custom. His brother's son carried a genetic quirk. Nothing dangerous, just a rare metabolic trait that required specific compounds to keep him hydrated under stress. Wren had crafted the blend himself under a pediatric consult. But what if those compounds, combined in that ratio, created more than medical relief? What if they mimicked the signature of something else? Something only military sensors would recognize. "Bran's scan," Wren murmured, eyes narrowing. "He had something, an old trigger. I saw it in his belt gear. Looked like a routine scanner, but it wasn't." He looked at Jalen. "That scan wasn't reacting to the liquid. It was reacting to me." Jalen's face tightened. "Because of your record?" Wren nodded slowly. "My field assignment. The medic ID. It was never deleted. Just buried. I thought it was shut down. But something's waking it back up." He pulled out his phone, cross-checking the sensor wavelengths from the bottle's compounds with a military signal chart he had saved years ago. There it was, barely visible, but real. A resonance pattern that matched the inactive signature assigned to dormant field medics during emergency deployments. It wasn't supposed to activate unless paired with biometric input, his fingerprint, his presence. But it had. "Someone linked the sensor net back to those dormant IDs," Wren said slowly. "Bran didn't recognize me. He recognized the pattern, and now I'm wondering how many others might trigger it." Jalen stared at him, his voice tightening. "You think this was the first test?" "I think it was the first successful test," Wren said grimly. "And I was the bait." He opened the security logs on the flash drive again. Near the end of the file, in a brief cut of footage, something else surfaced, Verdun glancing toward the baby, then back at Wren, just before whispering something to Hale. There was no audio on that part, but the direction of their gaze said everything. They had noticed the cough. Wren's hand instinctively gripped Laron's small foot, covered in a blanket. "The bottle triggered a signal," he said, but it was the baby that confirmed it. They knew something was different, not just in the contents, but in who needed them. The rideshare slowed to a red light. For a moment, everything outside the car was still. Pedestrians waiting to cross, a dog tugging on its leash, a billboard advertising some wellness app. Inside the car, time felt heavier. Wren finally looked at Jalen, his voice low and hollow. If the system's active again, if they've started reflagging agents using civilian sensors, then I wasn't profiled by mistake. I was a calibration point. Jalen didn't respond. The baby shifted slightly in his sleep, unaware that his need for hydration had just exposed a hidden system. Ren sat back, silent. The flash drive rested in his lap. The footage had already gone public. The footage was no longer the secret. He was. And whatever Bran saw in him, whatever Verdun whispered, was just the beginning. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to, because the only question left was the one no one wanted to ask. But what happens when the next person doesn't know how to stay calm? By the next morning, the incident at Veldenport International Terminal had already broken past the airport walls and surged across every major feed. The footage, shaky, raw, and painfully clear, played in looping clips on countless screens. Headlines appeared like shockwaves. Airport medic slammed over baby bottle but leaked footage reveals covert program. Security guard identified as ex-military screen agent. Navy medic targeted in hidden profiling test. Each title sharpened the truth Ren had sensed the moment Bran grabbed him. This was no routine confrontation. Ren sat at the small wooden table in Jalen's apartment, barely touched breakfast beside him, his eyes fixed on the screen as report after report spiraled outward. His phone vibrated constantly, but he answered only the calls that mattered. One voice, tremoring with age, introduced himself as a retired operations officer. Project Node Frame was never dismantled, the man said, his breath uneven as if confessing a long-buried secret. It was stored, renamed, buried, but not gone. Before Ren could ask anything, the call disconnected. Another whistleblower, a medical tech engineer, spoke more urgently, explaining that biometric tagging protocols designed years ago were quietly revived under new categories. Ren listened with a sinking feeling, the puzzle pieces pressing together in ways he wished they wouldn't. Across the room, Jalen sorted documents, notes, and timestamps with practiced focus. Laron slept against his shoulder, unaware that his small cough the day before had triggered the storm now raging across national networks. "We need to organize everything," Jalen said, his voice steady but weighted. "Every clip, every anomaly, every phrase Bran used." Ren nodded, grateful for the calm in Jalen's tone. But beneath that calm he could see fear. Fear for Ren. Fear for Laron. Fear for whatever Node Frame truly was. Corvin's video had become the center of attention. Independent outlets replayed the moment Bran whispered containment protocol, as if dissecting a coded message. One channel displayed slow-motion breakdowns, highlighting Bran's grip, the alarm lights, Ren's medic ID, and the arrival of Hale and Verdun. Analysts tried to form theories, but none had answers that fit neatly. The lack of clarity only fueled public suspicion. Then came the announcement that changed the day. An emergency hearing would be held by a senator known for advocating for families with medical exemptions. The senator's own child had once depended on specialized travel approval, making the footage impossible for him to ignore. Ren watched the broadcast from the living room couch, the senator's voice firm as he stated, "We must question why a medic was treated like a threat, and why a baby's bottle was used as justification for force." Ren felt tension tighten in his chest. He did not want to become a symbol. He only wanted the truth exposed. Meanwhile, Officer Bran was reportedly placed under internal review, but the statement released by the terminal director, Kellen Varick, offered no clarity, only evasive language about procedural evaluations and temporary reassignment. Derek and Torin, however, refused to let the truth blur. In a surprise press interview, they stood side by side, shoulders squared, eyes steady, speaking plainly to the cameras. "This incident proves the line between civilian safety and covert profiling has vanished," Derek said, his voice low but unwavering. Torin added, "Protocol was broken, authority was misused, and someone needed to say it. Their courage struck Ren deeply. Men who had once stood inside the system were now stepping outside of it, for him, and for anyone else who might be targeted next. With the evidence mounting, Ren moved forward with a decision he had been wrestling with all morning: filing a formal complaint. But this was no ordinary filing. When he arrived at the community hall set aside for public safety concerns, he discovered he was not alone. A new coalition had formed almost overnight, created by activists, former officers, and passengers who had watched the footage and seen something dangerous beneath the surface. They called themselves Guardian Rail, devoted to preventing covert militarization of civilian travel spaces. Ren stepped into their first gathering quietly, Laron in Jalen's arms beside him. The room fell silent, dozens of men turning toward the medic who had unintentionally become the catalyst for their cause. Ren felt exposed, unsure of what to say or how to stand. He had always worked behind the scenes, stabilizing others, not facing crowds. Before he could speak, Jalen stepped forward, resting one hand lightly on Ren's shoulder. His voice carried warmth, pride, and a steady resolve. "This is the medic who didn't strike back," Jalen said, looking around the room at every expectant face, but instead uncovered what was never meant to be seen. Ren felt the weight of the words settle over him, not a burden, but a recognition. The room responded with a quiet, collective nod, the kind that comes not from applause but from understanding. And for the first time since it all began, Ren didn't feel like a target. He felt like a signal. 2 weeks after the incident, Ren stood before the long pane of frosted glass that separated the hearing chamber from the media observation wing. His reflection stared back, tired, steady, and no longer just a medic. Jalen sat nearby, Laron asleep in his arms, bundled in a soft gray blanket that muffled the soft breathing of a child too young to understand the weight of the room. The bottle, now emptied, was tucked inside Ren's inner jacket pocket, close to his chest. It made no noise, but it carried every sound that had echoed through that terminal: the alarm, the shouts, the silence. The room beyond the glass was quiet. Officials adjusted their nameplates, straightened papers, but none of them looked up yet. A National Review Board of 5 men, appointed not just for transport policy but for security oversight, had gathered to hear the details behind what the press now called the Malik Bottle event. Ren hated the name, but he understood its impact. The doors opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. An usher in a black uniform motioned him in. No dramatic entrance. Just polished floors, high ceilings, and the low hum of cameras recording history in real time. Ren stepped forward with measured calm, every inch of him trained to resist the urge to rush. His Navy instincts guided each movement. Not defiance, not submission. Control. That was his shield now. "Dr. Ren Malik," a board member read, squinting at the digital docket. "You've been called to provide testimony regarding the events at Veldenport International Terminal, including the use of excessive force, potential protocol violations, and—" He paused, eyes scanning the file. "The attempted seizure of civilian medical property under unauthorized biometric flags." Ren sat, hands folded in his lap. "Yes, sir. We will allow you to deliver your statement before we proceed with questions." He nodded once and exhaled. His voice was calm but firm, sharpened by weeks of reflection and preparation. "On the morning of the incident, I was transporting my nephew, an infant, with a bottle of medically prescribed electrolytes due to a dehydration risk. The bottle was clearly labeled, documented, and exempt under transit protocols. Officer Bran Kaur refused to examine the documentation. Instead, he physically assaulted me and attempted to confiscate the item by force. I complied to every extent, until force made compliance dangerous." He paused. One of the men on the panel leaned in, interested. "I later discovered," Ren continued, "that my identity had been flagged through a dormant military biometric system once used in a now-defunct extraction program. Project Nodeframe. The system should have been decommissioned, but somehow it was not only active, it was hunting. A ripple passed through the audience behind the glass. Wren placed a small device on the table, pressing play. Corvin's footage rolled on the screen behind him, unedited, raw. It showed Brand's aggression, the ignored documentation, the second slam against the inspection table, the alarm, the language, protocol override, unauthorized medic access. It captured everything, proof that this was no misunderstanding. It was a trigger. The footage ended. Silence lingered. "Why was your name still in the system?" one panelist asked after a pause. "I don't know," Wren said, "but I have reason to believe it wasn't just my name. This wasn't about a bottle. It was about reactivating tags embedded in former military medics. I didn't trigger the system. The system was waiting to be triggered." The panelists shifted. The weight of his words made the oxygen thinner. Another asked, "How do you propose we ensure no civilian gets caught in this again?" "Stop blending military surveillance into public infrastructure," Wren replied instantly. "Stop assigning covert agents to civilian gates. Stop treating every bottle in a stroller like a test case for biometric profiling." Jalen, still silent, nodded from the gallery. Laron slept on, breathing slowly. A third panelist looked down at his notes. "Dr. Malik, I have one final question." Wren straightened. "If you hadn't been a trained Navy medic, calm under pressure, what do you think would have happened?" Wren stared at him. The question needed no dramatic build, just truth. "Someone less trained would have reacted," he said quietly. "And then you'd be reviewing a shooting, not a hearing." That silence in the room was the first real sound of change. The moment began without warning. 3 months had passed since the incident at Veldenport International Terminal, but in the quiet hall of the newly renovated Aviation Ethics Wing, a single artifact now drew silent attention. A small, transparent baby bottle, scratched, empty, capped tight, sat behind reinforced glass in an unmarked exhibit case near the back corner of the hall. No crowd had gathered, no ribbon-cutting took place, and yet its presence commanded more than any speech ever could. Beneath the glass was a narrow plaque, no wider than a man's palm. It read, "Medic, Uncle, Witness, Signal." Wren Malik stood a few feet away, not in uniform, not in the spotlight. Just a quiet figure in a gray jacket, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly tense. He hadn't intended to return here today, but Jalen had nudged him. "They're placing it today," he had said simply. "Not a ceremony, just recognition." Wren had nodded, not because he needed acknowledgement, but because he needed to see if something real had changed. From a hallway window, sunlight spilled in, casting faint glimmers across the floor. It was quiet. Most of the staff pretended not to know who he was, but their glances lingered a second too long. Wren didn't mind. He wasn't here to be thanked. He was here to remember. Behind him, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed, measured, familiar. Jalen Merrick entered with Laron in his arms, now healthy, cooing softly, bundled in a light blanket. His stroller squeaked slightly as Jalen parked it beside the bench across from the exhibit. "Still hate the attention?" Jalen asked, a small smile in his voice. Wren turned. "It's not about me. Never was." "That's what makes you the one they listen to," Jalen replied gently, settling beside him. Across the terminal landscape of policy change and public pressure, something had shifted. The advocacy group, Guardian Rail, was no longer a fringe initiative. What began as a loose alliance of whistleblowers and resigned officers had evolved into a movement. Wren hadn't asked to lead it. He refused titles, rejected media appearances, and only attended meetings where he could sit at the back and listen more than speak. Still, his name was everywhere. Jalen had taken up the logistics arm, quietly helping implement baby care access standards in terminals, pushing for immediate response protocols, and coordinating with officers across regional hubs. Derek Vale and Torrin Hale, both former security officers, now served as ethics officers in the new Civilian Oversight Committee attached to Guardian Rail. Their internal testimony had unraveled a string of outdated, shadowed directives masquerading as public safety. Corvin Hollis, the once nervous baggage attendant who dared to film when others froze, had become a reluctant hero. His footage, leaked anonymously, ignited public outrage. Now, Corvin sat on a National Transportation Reform Board, still shy, still wearing his staff ID even though he didn't need to anymore. And yet, for all that progress, some parts of the system remained shrouded. Hale and Verdun, those two suits from the Integrated Oversight Division, had vanished. No records, no agency confirmation, nothing but static. Multiple investigative journalists attempted to uncover who had authorized them, but each trail ended in silence. Behind the scenes, however, quiet audits rippled through other airports. Emergency reflags were paused, screening programs suspended, inboxes filled with whistleblower tips. Quiet hands in high places began shifting policies not to protect the system, but to protect the people. None of it had happened officially. But that was the point. Wren sat on the park bench just outside the ethics hall that afternoon, Laurent asleep in his lap, his hand gently resting over the baby's chest to feel the rise and fall of each breath. The city moved on beyond the glass walls. Children chased pigeons. A man in a reflective vest swept leaves into a bin. Normal life, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to seeing another incident explode. Wren didn't need statues. He didn't need credit. He needed the targeting to stop. A stranger walked by, mid-40s, quiet, unassuming. He slowed for just a moment, eyes flicking to the sleeping child, then up to Wren. Their gazes met. A beat passed. "I saw what you did," the man said. No fanfare, no name, just recognition. Then he walked on. Wren simply nodded back. No words, just breath, still and sure. He didn't need credit. He only needed the targeting to stop. And sometimes peace begins not with an apology, but with someone refusing to look away. Seconds later, the medic intervened, neutralizing the threat and leaving the guard frozen in disbelief. The cabin watched as authority and experience enforced immediate accountability. If you believe real authority protects the innocent with precision, discipline, and decisive action, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores abuse of authority, arrogance, and the consequences of underestimating someone with experience and skill. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage accountability, respect, and integrity in all situations.